I asked my son for $50 to refill my heart medication. Just 50. He stared at me like I was some stranger on the street and said, "Dad, I'm not your bank." That sentence, cold, effortless, hit me harder than any diagnosis I've ever had. I raised him. Paid for his college. Walked him down the aisle at his wedding. And now, he couldn't spare $50 to keep my heart beating. That night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, I didn't cry. I just opened my safe, and pulled out the old will. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. My name is Leonard Thomas. I was born in 1949, back when milk was delivered to your door and a handshake still meant something. I've lived in the same house for nearly 50 years, wood-framed, chipped paint, creaky floors. My wife used to call it a home with knees. It groaned when it moved, but it stood tall. Just like we did. I married Marjorie in 1973, after chasing her for 3 years. She was the kind of woman who didn't laugh easily, but when she did, it was worth it. That laugh filled this house. She had thick brown hair, always tied up in a loose bun when she cooked. She made the best cornbread you've ever tasted, sweet, buttery, fell apart in your hands. When Daniel was born in 1977, I held him with hands still dirty from the garage. I was a mechanic back then. I ran a small shop with 2 bays and a beat-up radio that only got country stations. But I loved that work. Fixing engines, tightening bolts, bringing dead cars back to life, there was something honest about it. I wasn't rich. Never even came close. But Marjorie and I knew how to stretch a dollar. We never argued about money, not once in 41 years. We saved, little by little, and paid off our home by the time I turned 60. That house became our anchor. Every nail in those walls, I hammered myself. Daniel helped me repaint the siding one summer when he was 15. Complained about the heat the whole time, but he did it. He was a good kid. Polite, funny, always bringing home stray dogs or frogs in his backpack. I remember him asking me once, "Dad, are we rich?" I laughed and said, "No, son. But we've got what we need." That answer satisfied him. Back then, it did. Marjorie stayed home when Daniel was young. She baked, volunteered at church, sewed clothes that looked store-bought. She made birthdays magical, always a homemade cake, candles, and a gift wrapped in Sunday comics. I remember Daniel crying one year when she made him a stuffed astronaut doll. He held on to that thing for a decade. We were the kind of family that ate dinner together. No phones, no TV. Just talking, laughing, arguing sometimes about which pie was better, pecan or apple. I always said pecan. Marjorie would roll her eyes and sneak me an extra slice after dinner. When Daniel got older, he started to drift like most boys do. Friends, sports, girls. But we stayed close. I taught him how to change oil, fix a tire, file taxes. When he wanted to go to college, we used most of our savings and even took out a small loan. He never knew that part. I wanted him to focus on school, not how we scraped by. He got into accounting. Said he liked numbers because they didn't lie. I used to think that was a smart way to see the world. Later, I'd realize it wasn't always true. When Daniel met Rachel, I didn't judge. She was different, polished, driven, the kind of woman who spoke in bullet points. Marjorie thought she was cold, but I tried to see the good in her. We welcomed her with open arms. Helped them with their wedding. Even gave them a down payment for their first condo. Marjorie passed in 2014. Lung cancer. Never smoked a day in her life. She went fast, but not easy. I held her hand every night in that hospital, whispering memories into her ear like bedtime stories. Daniel visited twice. Said he was busy with work. Rachel didn't come at all. After the funeral, Daniel hugged me and said, "We'll get through this together." I believed him. I wanted to. But something shifted after that. He started calling less, stopped inviting me to family events. I'd drop by and feel like a guest in my own son's world. Rachel would offer me coffee like I was a neighbor, not a father-in-law. Still, I gave them space. I figured maybe it was grief, or stress. I never wanted to be a burden. I kept busy with the house, the lawn, my old tools. I'd talk to Marjorie sometimes, not out loud, but in my head. I'd tell her how the roses were blooming or how Daniel sounded tired on the phone. In the years after her death, I put everything into making sure Daniel would be okay. I added his name to the property deed. Made him the sole heir in my will. I even put aside a small fund for my granddaughter Ellie, for college, or a wedding, or whatever she wanted someday. I thought that was what good fathers did, give everything, expect nothing. But maybe that was my mistake. Because little by little, I started to see that the more I gave, the less I mattered. The first time I noticed the change, it was so small, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. It was Daniel's birthday, his 41st, I think. I stopped by their house with a gift, an old watch that belonged to my father. I'd had it cleaned up, replaced the strap. He always admired it as a kid. When I handed it to him, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Rachel glanced at it, then turned back to her phone. "Vintage stuff's tricky to resell," she said, half laughing. I brushed it off. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe Daniel was distracted. But when I left that day, I walked to my car with the kind of silence that clings to your coat. Heavy, uncertain. It happened again at Christmas. I used to host, big roast, lights on the porch, the fireplace burning low. But that year, Daniel said it would make more sense logistically for me to come to their place. I brought my famous sweet potato casserole, the one Marjorie taught me to make. No one touched it. Rachel had catered everything. "Clean, gluten-free," she said, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on the countertop. During dinner, I tried talking to Ellie, my granddaughter. She was 10 at the time, always full of questions and bright energy. But Rachel kept interrupting, correcting her, telling her not to bother Grandpa. Bother me? Ellie never bothered me. Her little voice was one of the few things that still warmed this tired heart. That night, I left early. Told them I had a headache. Daniel barely looked up from his wine glass. Not even a hug goodbye. Over the months, things kept shifting. Phone calls went unanswered. Texts got shorter. "Can't talk now, busy. Let's catch up next week." But next week never came. The warmth we once had, Saturday barbecues, surprise visits, long chats about work and family, all of it faded like a song you forget the lyrics to. Then came the first real jab. I had a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink. Nothing major, just a slow drip. Normally I'd fix it myself, but my knees aren't what they used to be. I called Daniel, asked if he could swing by after work. He hesitated, then said, "Dad, I've got a lot on my plate right now. Maybe just call a plumber?" I said I understood. But I didn't. Not really. I'd helped him install his first dishwasher when he bought that condo. I drove across town in a snowstorm to change a tire for him when he was 22. But now I couldn't even get a spare hour for a pipe. I hired a handyman. The job cost $120. 2 days later, Daniel posted pictures online of a new espresso machine he bought, $900. That's when something inside me quietly snapped. Not anger. Just realization. It wasn't about the money. Never was. It was the shift in how I was being seen. Once, I was Dad, the steady hands, the problem solver, the man who made things happen. Now I was an old man with needs. Inconvenient. Replaceable. Rachel started calling more than Daniel did, not to check in, but to discuss logistics. She talked about future planning, how the market was volatile, how houses lose value over time if they aren't updated. At first, I didn't catch her drift. But eventually, I realized, she was talking about my house. The one I built with Marjorie. The one still filled with her photos, her recipes, her scent. She suggested I consider scaling down. Said I'd be more comfortable in a smaller place. A retirement community, maybe. She even emailed me a brochure once, like it was a vacation package. I called Daniel that evening, hoping for reassurance. She's just trying to help, he said, with a tone that made me feel foolish. You're getting older, Dad. You can't expect to live alone forever. I hung up, stared at the framed photo of Marjorie by the window. I whispered to her, they want the house. And for the first time, I felt sure she was listening. There were other signs too. When I visited their home, I noticed how Rachel always kept her handbag close, even when I was sitting quietly in the living room. Like she didn't trust me near her things. They started locking their liquor cabinet. Stopped inviting me to vacations, even though I offered to pay my own way. And Daniel, my son, my only child, began to talk to me like I was slow. Don't worry about that, Dad, it's complicated. You probably wouldn't get it, just let me handle it. I smiled, nodded. But each time, something inside me receded further into itself. One afternoon, I offered to pick Ellie up from school. Rachel was running late. I thought I was being helpful. But when she arrived, she looked at me with fire in her eyes. You can't just make decisions like that, she snapped. What if something happened? I wanted to shout, I raised Daniel without a GPS or a nanny app. I know how to keep a child safe. But I said nothing. Just nodded and apologized. Again. That night, I opened my wallet and looked at an old photo tucked inside, Daniel on my shoulders at the county fair, cotton candy in his fist, laughter frozen in time. I hadn't felt that weight, that little boy's trust, in years. Something was shifting. Not suddenly. Not violently. But slowly, like a slow leak in a tire you don't notice until the rim scrapes the road. They were pulling away. Not just emotionally, but practically. Logistically. With smiles and silence and spreadsheets. And I kept pretending it wasn't happening. It happened on a Thursday, gray sky, heavy air, the kind of day that makes your joints ache more than usual. I'd just come back from the clinic. Doctor said my blood pressure was too high. Told me to get my prescription filled immediately, something about not pushing my luck at this age. I smiled politely and walked out, but my chest felt tight before I even made it to the parking lot. I went to the pharmacy. The refill cost $49.67. My wallet had $31. I stood there, fingers trembling, pretending to look through my coat for a card I knew wasn't there. Social Security didn't hit for another 5 days. My savings had already gone into a new hot water heater after the last one died. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I called Daniel. Hey, son, I said, trying to sound casual. I'm at the pharmacy. My meds are a bit short this month. Think you could send me $50? There was a pause on the line. Then a sigh. Dad, he said, exasperated. Again? What happened to the check from last month? I explained. Gently. I didn't ask for pity. Just help. A little bridge till next week. $50, the price of dinner for two at any of the restaurants Rachel likes. Another pause. Look, he said, I'm not your ATM. I've got Ellie's dance fees, Rachel's car insurance, the house. It's just not a good time, okay? I was silent for a second. I wanted to ask if he remembered the time I skipped meals so he could go on the school field trip to DC. Or the time I sold my prized toolbox to cover the down payment for his wedding. But I didn't say any of that. "Okay," I said. "No problem. Take care." He hung up. "No, I love you." "No, are you okay?" Just the click of finality. I walked out of the pharmacy empty-handed, clutching my coat tighter than I needed to. The wind bit through the fabric like it knew something had changed. By the time I got home, my chest was throbbing. Not the heart attack kind, I've had one, I know the signs. No, this was deeper. Like something in my ribcage had been cracked from the inside. Not physically. Spiritually. That evening, I sat in my armchair by the window, staring at the streetlight flickering on the corner. I didn't eat. Didn't turn on the TV. Just stared, thinking about how we got here. A knock at the door broke the silence. It was Susan, my neighbor. She's in her 60s, takes care of her husband who's got Parkinson's. A tough, kind woman. She handed me a brown paper bag. "The pharmacist called me," she said. "Said you didn't pick this up. Figured you'd be too proud to ask again." I tried to protest. She shook her head. "Next time, don't wait. We look out for each other around here." I thanked her, my voice caught in my throat. After she left, I held the bag for a long time before opening it. There it was, the bottle that would keep my heart going. Paid for by someone who owed me nothing. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept turning over Daniel's words in my head. "I'm not your ATM." And then it hit me. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't forgetfulness or busy schedules. It was a belief. He truly saw me as a drain. A liability. Something to be managed, like a leftover subscription you forget to cancel. The following weekend was Ellie's recital. I still went. Sat in the back, clutching the roses I bought with change I scraped together from an old coffee can. She danced beautifully, like Marjorie used to in the kitchen when no one was watching. After the show, I tried to hand her the flowers. Rachel took them instead, smiling tight-lipped. "Oh, Leonard, that's sweet," she said. "But we already got her some." Ellie reached for me anyway, hugged me tight. For a second, I felt okay. Until I saw Daniel watching from the side, not smiling, not proud. Just staring like I'd interrupted something. A few minutes later, as families posed for pictures and handed out balloons, I stood alone near the exit. I heard Rachel speaking behind me, quietly but not quiet enough. "He can't keep doing this, showing up, expecting to be the center of attention. We need to set boundaries." Daniel didn't respond. At least not with words. But the silence, it said enough. On the ride home, I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. Past the park where Daniel learned to ride his bike. Past the church where Marjorie and I married. Past everything that felt familiar, now wrapped in distance. When I got home, I stood in the hallway for a long time. Looking at the walls. The pictures. The house I built with my hands. The same hands that once held Daniel's when he was sick, scared, small. I walked to my study. Opened the drawer. Pulled out the will I had updated after Marjorie passed. His name was there, Daniel Thomas, sole heir. Everything would go to him. I sat at my desk. Took out a pen. I didn't cross his name out yet. But I placed a sticky note on top that said, "Review this soon." Because something in me had finally shifted. The first time I heard them talking about me, truly talking about me, not just to me, I was in the hallway outside Daniel's office. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was dropping off a birthday card for Ellie. It had $20 inside and a note that said, "Don't ever stop dancing." I figured I'd leave it in their mailbox and be on my way. But the door was cracked open, and Rachel's voice carried like it always did when she was annoyed. "We need to push him," she said. "He's clinging to that house like it's a shrine. It's not healthy." There was a pause. Then Daniel, in that soft, uncertain voice I barely recognized anymore, it was Mom's place. "You know how he is." Rachel scoffed. "We're not going to wait for him to drop dead, Daniel. He's not getting any younger, and that property's sitting there like wasted potential. You saw the appraisal. $500,000, easy." My feet froze to the floor. I leaned slightly forward, heart thudding. "I just think we should talk to him," Daniel said. "Ease him into it." "No," Rachel said. "You talk to the lawyer first. See what options we have. If he signs anything now, even just power of attorney, we can start planning renovations by spring. You want to keep waiting? You want to raise Ellie in that condo forever?" There was silence. Then Daniel murmured, "I'll call him tomorrow." I stepped back quietly and left the card in the mailbox like I planned. But when I got in the car, I just sat there. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, not from rage, but from the realization that everything I had once believed, about family, love, legacy, was being quietly rewritten behind my back. I didn't drive home right away. I parked by the lake where Marjorie and I used to go on Sundays. She loved the ducks. Always brought breadcrumbs in her purse, even when the sign said not to feed them. I sat on that bench, her bench, for over an hour. I didn't cry. I wish I could have. But the well inside me felt dry. What replaced it was something colder. A slow, deliberate disappointment that settled into my bones. The next day, Daniel did call. He asked if we could meet for lunch. I agreed. We went to a place he liked, one of those modern cafes with reclaimed wood and no prices on the menu. I wore my best shirt. Shaved. Tried to look alert, sharp, not like some confused old man they thought I'd become. He made small talk for a while. Asked about my knees, the weather, if I'd thought about simplifying. I waited. Let him circle the prey. Then he said it. "You know, Dad, a lot of folks your age are finding that retirement communities offer better quality of life. Less stress. More help when you need it." I stared at him. He continued, "Rachel found a few nice ones nearby. Not nursing homes, just active living spaces. You'd have neighbors, activities, even a shuttle to appointments. We could help with the paperwork." "Paperwork," I repeated. "Is that what I am now?" He smiled like he hadn't heard me. "It's just something to think about. You've got this big old place, all by yourself. It might be time." I asked him then, directly, calmly, like I already knew the answer. "Did you talk to a lawyer?" His face didn't flinch, but his eyes did. Just for a second. A flicker. "I had a conversation," he said. "Nothing official. Just exploring options." "And Rachel? She's part of this too?" He hesitated. "She's just worried. We both are." I nodded. Took a sip of water. My hands were steady. I think that scared him more than if I'd yelled. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "I'll think about it." We paid the bill, rather, I paid. And I walked out into the sunlight feeling like I'd just buried something. Not a body. Not even a relationship. But trust. The kind that can't be revived once it's been quietly starved over time. That night, I opened the safe. Inside was the will. Next to it, a faded envelope labeled, "For Daniel, only when I'm gone." It was the letter I wrote after Marjorie died. Full of fatherly wisdom, reminders of values, a map of everything he'd inherit. I took the letter out. Burned it in the fireplace. Watched the ashes curl and rise like everything else I'd given him. And then I sat down at the kitchen table, took out a fresh notebook, and began writing something new. Not a will, not yet. Just notes. Observations. Names of people I trusted, and those I didn't. Ideas. Options. Because if they were planning behind my back, it was time I started planning quietly, too. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. It took me 2 weeks to decide what to do next. 2 weeks of pretending everything was fine. 2 weeks of answering Daniel's texts like nothing had changed. 2 weeks of Rachel calling to check in, thinly veiled as concern, but really just probing for weakness. I told her I was doing great. I even thanked her for the brochures. Said I was looking into my options. That seemed to make her happy. That was the first sign I was doing the right thing. Then I did what I never thought I'd have to do with my own child. I started documenting things. Notes from every conversation. Copies of texts. Voice memos of anything that felt off. I wasn't sure what I was building yet, a case, maybe. Or maybe just the truth in a form someone else could see. It came to a head on a Tuesday. I invited Daniel over for lunch. Just him. No Rachel. Told him I wanted to talk man to man. He seemed surprised, but he agreed. Said he'd swing by around noon. I made sandwiches, just like I used to when he was in high school. Turkey, cheddar, little bit of mustard, cut diagonally. He always liked it that way. He showed up 10 minutes late, on the phone, laughing about something. Didn't even say hello at first, just walked in like it was his house. I've only got about half an hour, he said, checking his watch. Rachel and I have an appointment with the realtor. That word again, realtor. Like a slip he didn't mean to say. I kept my face neutral. Realtor? For what? He blinked. Oh, nothing serious. Just browsing. You know. I didn't press it. Just nodded and handed him a plate. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I helped him with math homework, where he cried after his first breakup, where he once built a cardboard fort during a thunderstorm. Now, he sat there checking his phone between bites. I wanted to ask you something, I said, setting down my glass. Why now? He looked up. What do you mean? This push. The brochures. The power of attorney talk. The lawyer. The retirement home. Why now? He shifted. Cleared his throat. Dad, I've been meaning to bring this up for a while. It's not about now. It's about planning. Responsibility. You're almost 76. What happens if you fall? If you forget your meds? You live alone in a house that's too big for you. It's not practical. Not practical, I repeated. Right. I mean, you've had health issues. What if something happens and no one finds you for days? I nodded. Let that hang. And the house? I asked quietly. What about it? You've been looking at its value. Talking about renovations. With a realtor. Behind my back. He froze. Just for a moment. We're not trying to take anything from you, he said, too quickly. We just want to help you transition. Make things easier. For everyone. I leaned back in my chair. Funny. When your mother was dying, you didn't seem this concerned about her transition. She wanted to die at home. You told her she was being dramatic. That's not fair, he snapped. No. It's not, I said. None of this is. There was a long silence. Then, for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something real in his face. Not guilt, not quite. But a sliver of recognition. Like maybe, just maybe, he realized what he'd become. He stood up. "I don't want to fight." "Neither do I," I said. "But I'm not signing anything, Daniel. And I'm not leaving this house." He shook his head. "You're being stubborn." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm being your father. One last time." He left after that. Didn't even finish his sandwich. The next morning, Susan came by with some soup. She could tell something had happened. "You look tired," she said, setting the container on the counter. I shrugged. "Family stuff." She gave me a look, the kind that says, "You're not alone, even if you feel like it." "You know," she said, sitting down across from me, "we all hit a point where we have to decide, is blood thicker than peace?" I didn't answer. But I thought about that all day. That evening, I walked to the post office. Dropped off a letter I'd written to an old friend of mine, Harold, a lawyer who used to share a hunting cabin with me and Marjorie back in the day. We hadn't talked in a few years, but he always said, "If you ever need a will drawn that'll make greedy people cry, I'm your guy." It was time to find out if he meant it. Because I was done pretending. Done hoping Daniel would wake up and remember the boy who once clutched my hand in the dark, asking if monsters were real. He'd become one. And I was finally ready to face it. He opened a drawer and pulled out a blank will packet. "All right," he said. "Let's write a will that says what you mean. Not what people expect." I told him exactly what I wanted. Daniel would be removed entirely. Not a penny. Not a painting. Not a tool from the garage. Instead, I wanted the house and all remaining assets, roughly $500,000 between the property and savings, to go into a charitable trust. Something simple, local, human. I didn't want my life's work swallowed by lawyers and red tape. We came up with a name together, the Marjorie Thomas Memorial Fund. It would support veterans, widows, and local trades apprentices, people who reminded me of the community Marjorie loved, and the values we lived by. There would be a clause, too, one I made Harold repeat twice to be sure. "If the will is contested by any party," I said, "then all assets are to be donated to the Veterans Medical Fund of North Carolina. No appeals. No second chances." Harold nodded. "A nuclear clause. Effective. Necessary," I replied. Then came the part one didn't expect to be so hard, signing it. My hand trembled a little as I took the pen. Not because I was unsure. But because, in that moment, I felt the final break in something I'd spent my entire life trying to protect. A father's love. A son's bond. A hope that one day, Daniel would come back to the man he used to be. That hope died with my signature. After it was done, Harold slid a sealed copy across the table. "Put that in your safe," he said. "Somewhere only you can access." I nodded. As I stood to leave, Harold put a hand on my shoulder. "You're not a bitter man, Leonard. Don't let anyone say you are. You're a man who gave everything, and then gave more. You're just finally choosing peace." I thanked him and walked out into the crisp air. It was just past noon, sun warm against my face. I sat in my truck for a while, letting the moment settle. Then I drove home. When I got back, I walked into the study and placed the will in the safe, just beneath Marjorie's old recipe box. I ran my hand along the box's worn edge. She used to keep little notes in there, not just recipes, but reminders. Call Mom. Leave a flower for the neighbor. Daniel's permission slip. It felt right, putting the will there. With her things. She always had a better sense of fairness than I did. That night, I made myself a simple dinner. Fried egg sandwich. Mug of coffee. I sat by the window, listening to the breeze roll through the trees. The house creaked a little, its usual groan, like it knew something had changed inside its walls. I didn't feel victorious. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about hurting Daniel. It was about protecting the only thing I had left that still felt like mine. My dignity. My home. My word. I went to bed early that night, but I didn't sleep right away. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how life has a way of bringing you full circle. I came into this world in a house not much different from this one. I worked my whole life to build a place where family would always feel safe. And now, at 76, I just had to lock my door from the inside, not to keep strangers out, but to keep my own blood from taking what wasn't theirs. But for the first time in a long while, I felt safe again. It came by certified mail, a thick, white envelope with my full name typed neatly across the front, like a stranger was addressing me. I signed for it at the door, nodded politely to the delivery man, and stood in my hallway staring at it for a long time. My gut already knew. The kind of knowing that lives deep in your bones, beyond words or warnings. I opened it at the kitchen table with a butter knife. Inside were 8 pages from Daniel's lawyer. Cold, impersonal language wrapped in legalese, concern for your well-being, recommendation for assisted living transition, property maintenance strain, temporary power of attorney discussion. And then the line that stopped me cold. In the event Mr. Leonard Thomas is unable or unwilling to make reasonable accommodations, the family may pursue guardianship options for his own protection. Guardianship. My own son was exploring legal avenues to take control of my life. My home. My decisions. I sat there, eyes scanning the letter again, trying to convince myself I'd read it wrong. But no matter how many times I went over it, it said what it said. They were ready to put me in a home if I didn't hand over the keys. I looked around the house, my house. The faded wallpaper Marjorie picked out in 1981. The crooked curtain rod Daniel helped install when he was 9. The photo of our wedding day on the mantel, slightly tilted like it always was because the frame's back leg was a bit short. This wasn't just property. It was breath. Memory. Years pressed into floorboards and doorframes. And they wanted to turn it into leverage. I thought back to all the justifications Daniel had given. We're just trying to help. You can't stay alone forever. The sweet coating over poison. The rehearsed concern that sounded more like a sales pitch. That night, I didn't eat. I sat in my armchair, wrapped in an old quilt Marjorie had made from Ellie's baby clothes, and I stared into the dark until morning. Not out of fear. Not even sadness anymore. Just focus. The next day, I made calls. First to Harold, told him what I'd received. He asked if I wanted to preemptively respond. I said no. Not yet. Let them think I'm still the old man with the slow steps and soft voice. It's better that way. Then I called the town clerk and requested a certified copy of the deed, just to make sure every detail was right. And finally, I called Ellie's school and left a message with the front desk, tell her grandpa says keep dancing. No matter what happens. That weekend was Rachel's parents' anniversary. Big gathering at a rented hall in the nicer part of town, catered dinner, live music, all the pretense that comes with trying to show how well a family is doing. I wasn't invited. But I showed up anyway. I wore my best coat. The one Marjorie bought me for our 30th anniversary. Dark gray, still smelled faintly of cedar. I walked into that room like I had every right to be there, because I did. People turned. Whispers started. Rachel's face stiffened when she saw me. Daniel came toward me, smiling awkwardly. Dad, this probably isn't the... I held up my hand. Don't, I said. Just listen. I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table near the hors d'oeuvres. The music had lowered. Conversations paused. In this folder, I said, loud enough for the room to hear, is a copy of my newly signed will. It removes Daniel Thomas from any and all inheritance. In its place, the Marjorie Thomas Memorial Fund has been created to support causes she believed in. Rachel took a step forward. Leonard, let's not make a scene. This isn't a scene, I said, my voice steady. This is a clarification. I turned to Daniel. I asked you for $50, Daniel. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to know if you'd offer it. And instead, you chose judgment. You chose silence. And then, you chose schemes. He looked like a man unraveling in slow motion. I continued, you've made it clear through words and actions that I am a burden. A risk. A loose end to tie up. So I'm tying it up myself, legally, completely, and with full understanding of what it means. I looked around the room. There will be no courtroom battle. No contesting. Because if there is, every cent goes to the Veterans Medical Fund. Not a penny to a Thomas. Rachel's face was crimson. Daniel looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I picked up the folder, placed it back under my arm. Consider this the last family gathering I'll attend. Not because I'm leaving, but because you already did. I turned and walked out. I don't remember the drive home. Just the feeling of breath, full, clean, unburdened, returning to my lungs like I hadn't felt in years. When I got back, I changed into pajamas, heated some leftover stew, and sat by the fireplace. The silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. They'd tried to break me down piece by piece. Instead, they built the man who finally said, enough. A week after the anniversary party, Daniel texted me. Can we talk? No apology. No explanation. Just those 3 words, short, clipped, like this was business. I didn't answer. He texted again the next day, then Rachel called and left a message, you really hurt Daniel. He's trying to make things right. Right. That word doesn't mean what they think it does. Then Ellie called. Hi, Grandpa, she said, her voice soft. Mom and Dad said you might be mad. Are you mad at me, too? That one pierced. Not like the others, this one went straight to the heart. No, sweetheart, I said quickly, never at you. We talked about her recital, her math homework, a book she was reading. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet, staring at the photo of her in the hallway, missing teeth, a crooked tiara, biggest smile in the world. That's when I decided I needed to make the truth known, publicly. Once. Calmly. Clearly. I picked the day carefully, Sunday afternoon, at church. Marjorie and I had attended that church for 40 years. It's where Daniel was baptized, where we held her memorial, where I still sat on the back pew every other week and prayed for clarity. That Sunday was family day, potluck, games for the kids, people mingling in the fellowship hall. I showed up with a box of Marjorie's old recipe cards and a calm I hadn't felt in months. The room buzzed with small talk and casserole dishes. When I walked in, people turned. Smiles, nods, some awkward, others warm. I made my way to the table near the front, where Rachel and Daniel stood with Ellie. Daniel looked up, surprised. Dad, he said cautiously. I nodded. Good to see you, son. Rachel stiffened. Leonard, maybe we can talk somewhere private. No, I said gently. Here is fine. I opened the envelope I'd brought and placed several copies of the will on the table. What is this? Daniel asked, voice tense. This, I said, is the truth. So no one has to wonder anymore. The room had quieted. Not silent, just low enough that every word seemed to hang in the air a little longer than usual. I am no longer leaving this house, or anything else, to Daniel Thomas, I said calmly. My estate will go to the Marjorie Thomas Memorial Fund. It will support the kind of people my wife and I believed in. Because what we built on love and sacrifice. Not entitlement. Daniel looked like he'd been slapped. Rachel stepped forward, whispering sharply, "This is emotional blackmail." "No," I said, still calm. "This is a boundary. One you crossed when you discussed legal control over my life with strangers, before talking to me." I turned to Daniel. "You sent me legal documents. You plotted behind my back. And when I asked you for $50 to get my medication, you said no. Not because you didn't have it, but because you didn't care." His lips parted. "That's not, Dad, it wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Ellie was looking up at us, confused, her small hand clinging to Daniel's sleeve. She didn't understand all of it. But she felt the weight. I knelt down beside her. "Ellie, you're a bright light. I hope one day you understand that kindness isn't about money. It's about showing up. Listening. And standing by the people who stood by you." She nodded slowly, uncertainly. I stood up and faced the room. "I won't speak of this again. I'm not asking for sides or sympathy. I just want peace. This is my peace." Then I walked out. Just like that. No slamming doors. No tears. Just footsteps that finally felt like they were walking away from something finished. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of lemonade. The wind was soft. The sun was dipping low. And for the first time in a long time, the silence around me felt like it was mine, not forced, not given, but chosen. I wasn't sure if Daniel would call again. And honestly, I didn't need him to. Because the truth had been spoken. Out loud. In front of everyone who ever mattered. And that was enough. The days that followed were quiet. Not peaceful, not yet, but quiet in that hollow way a house feels after a storm. No phone calls. No knocks at the door. Just the occasional sound of the wind pressing against the window panes, like the world itself was pausing, waiting to see what I'd do next. I stayed busy. That's always been my way. I oiled the hinges on the back porch door. Cleaned the gutters. Even pulled out the old mower and gave the lawn a trim, though my knees made sure I paid for it the next morning. It helped, somehow, doing things that had nothing to do with Daniel, or wills, or lawyers. Just simple, honest work. The kind Marjorie used to call soul chores. The town, of course, had its whispers. Susan from across the street stopped by with a casserole and a raised eyebrow. She didn't ask outright, but her voice dipped just enough to let me know she'd heard. "Lot of folks surprised by what you said at church," she murmured, scooping mashed potatoes onto 2 plates. "Some even say it took guts." I didn't say much. Just nodded and said thank you. But inside, I was wondering how many people thought I was cruel. Ungrateful. Petty. It's a strange thing, how people rush to judge a parent who finally says enough, but rarely ask what it took to get there. The grocery store was worse. People I'd known for decades glanced away or gave me tight smiles. Others, mostly the older folks, gave me firm nods or a soft pat on the back. One afternoon, as I was walking out of the post office, Reverend Mallory approached me. "Leonard," he said gently, "you okay?" "I'm fine, Reverend." He hesitated. "You know, families, they break, sometimes. But the door should never be locked." I looked him square in the eye. Sometimes the door's been kicked in so many times, locking it is the only way to keep the roof from caving. He didn't argue. Just squeezed my shoulder and walked away. At night, the silence stretched longer. Not because I was lonely, but because I was listening. For memories. For Marjorie's voice. For echoes of who I used to be before all this wore me thin. I'd walk the halls and let my fingers trail along the woodwork Daniel once helped me sand. I'd run my hand over the piano Marjorie used to play, out of tune now, but still standing. Like me. I started talking to her again. Not in a crazy old man way. Just quietly. Whispering. Did I go too far, Marge? Did I let the bitterness win? But deep down, I knew the answer. It wasn't bitterness. It was survival. And maybe even a little bit of grace, the kind that doesn't look like forgiveness but feels like finally being honest. One morning, about 10 days after the confrontation at church, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Ellie standing there, holding a Tupperware container and a folded piece of paper. Her hair was in a ponytail, a few flyaways framing her face. She looked up at me with that same expression she used to wear when she'd fall and scrape her knee, brave, but barely. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hi, sweetheart." She handed me the container. "Mom made stew. She said I could bring it. But I made the cornbread." I smiled. "You remembered how much I like it?" She nodded. We sat on the porch. She talked about school, a project she was doing on family history. I listened, chiming in here and there, letting her speak freely. Then she pulled out the folded paper. "I wrote something for my project," she said. "It's about you." I unfolded it carefully. It was a simple essay, a few paragraphs about her grandfather, the house he built, the way he taught her to tie knots and plant tomatoes. But one line caught me. "Even when people forget who you were, if you remember who you are, you'll be okay." My grandpa Leonard taught me that. I didn't say anything. Just reached over and squeezed her hand. When she left, I stood in the doorway watching her ride off on her bike, her backpack bouncing with every turn. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. Not quite. But the beginning of peace. Maybe I'd never get an apology from Daniel. Maybe Rachel would never understand what they took from me. But I still had Ellie. And I still had this house, not just the walls and the roof, but the heart of it. The purpose. The soul. That night, I sat on the back steps, listening to the crickets. The stars were out. The wind was soft. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again, not just because I'd let go, but because I'd held on to the one thing that mattered most. Myself. It started with a knock on the door. Not the kind that brings bad news, this one had rhythm. 3 short raps, a pause, then 2 more. Friendly. Curious. When I opened it, Ellie stood there again, this time holding a small notebook and a determined look. "Grandpa," she said, "I have an idea. And I think you're going to like it." She sat me down at the kitchen table, opened the notebook, and began flipping through pages she'd filled with lists, sketches, even some color-coded sticky notes. "Remember how you said this house has too many rooms for just one old man?" she asked. I smirked. I might have said that once or twice. "Well," she said, tapping the notebook, "what if it wasn't just for you?" At first, I didn't quite follow. But she explained. She wanted to help turn the house into something bigger, something alive. A community space, a place that could be part of the Marjorie Thomas Memorial Fund. Not a formal center with neon signs and corporate grants. Something simpler. Human. A place where people can come if they're lonely. Or need help. Or just want to feel like someone sees them, she said. "Like you always made me feel." My throat tightened. I asked, "And what would we call this place?" She grinned. "Marjorie's house." The name hit me like a gust of warm wind. So simple. So right. In the days that followed, I threw myself into the idea with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Ellie came over every afternoon after school, and together we went room by room, deciding what could stay, what could go. We cleared out the guest bedroom, the one Marjorie used to use as her sewing room, and turned it into a quiet reading nook. We moved her old armchair beside the window, added some shelves from the attic, and painted the walls a soft green, her favorite color. The dining room became the heart of it all. We placed a long table in the center, one I found on Craigslist and repaired myself. Chairs of every shape and size surrounded it, mismatched, but full of charm. Susan from across the street donated a kettle and a set of teacups. Harold dropped off a filing cabinet for storing community forms. A local carpenter offered to fix the creaky steps for free. Word spread quickly. One afternoon, a Vietnam vet named George knocked on the door. He'd heard about what we were doing from his barber. Said he didn't need anything, just wanted a place to sit for a while. He came every Tuesday after that. Then came Miriam, a widowed teacher who'd been living alone since 2010. She brought crossword puzzles and stories that made Ellie laugh so hard, she cried. We didn't hang a sign on the lawn. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony. But little by little, Marjorie's house became exactly what it was meant to be, a refuge. A heartbeat. A home within a home. I'd walk the halls and hear voices again, soft conversations, laughter in the kitchen, the clinking of teacups. The creaks in the floor no longer sounded like ghosts. They sounded like footsteps. Life. There were challenges, of course. I had to set boundaries, certain hours, certain days. The house couldn't run itself. But the work didn't exhaust me. It fueled me. For the first time in a long while, people needed me, not for money, or signatures, or property. Just for me. And I needed them, too. One evening, Ellie and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset. She had paint on her hands from a mural she was helping a few kids paint in the hallway. You look happier, she said. I feel useful, I told her. She leaned her head on my shoulder. You've always been useful. They just forgot. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind through the trees. I thought about Daniel, about the boy he used to be. The one who hugged me tight when I came home smelling like engine grease. The one who once gave me a Father's Day card that said, "You fix things, even when they're invisible." And I realized something, I couldn't fix him. But I could still build something good. Not out of spite. Not to prove a point. But because Marjorie would have wanted me to. She believed in second chances. In healing. In community. And now, her house, our house, was becoming the living, breathing proof of that belief. One paintbrush. One cup of tea. One quiet smile at a time. By mid-fall, the leaves had started turning, deep orange, rusty red, the kind of colors Marjorie used to call God's confetti. The whole street looked like it had been brushed with warmth. So did Marjorie's house. We weren't a charity. Not officially. But word had spread far enough that people started dropping by just to be near something good. Something kind. Every Thursday, we held coffee and chores. Anyone who showed up helped clean, patch, organize, and in return, we shared coffee, warm bread, and laughter. Simple trade. No handouts. Just hands, working together. George, the Vietnam vet, became the unofficial handyman. He wore his flannel shirt tucked tight, called me Captain, and always had a joke about the coffee being too weak. But he never missed a day. Miriam brought her record player. We'd play old vinyls in the sunroom and let the music drift out the windows. Sometimes I'd catch people swaying gently while folding laundry or sweeping the porch. One rainy Tuesday, a young man named Carlos knocked on the door. Early 20s. Thin. Eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. Said he'd heard from a woman at the food pantry that we sometimes helped people get back on their feet. I invited him in. No questions. He ended up staying for 2 weeks, not overnight, just during the days. We gave him a chair, a journal, some space. He fixed the back fence without being asked. Painted the side steps. By the time he left for a job in the next town, he hugged me like I was family. That's what started happening. People hugging me, like I mattered. Not because I had anything they needed. But because I offered what they didn't have, a safe place. A warm room. Someone to look them in the eye and say, "You're not invisible." And in return, I got something I hadn't realized I was missing. Real family. Not the kind that shares your last name but the kind that shares your soul. People who show up without expectations. Who bring casseroles when you're sick. Who ask how you are and wait for the answer. Susan came by almost daily now, not just to check on me, but to sit and talk. She opened up about her husband's condition, her fear of losing herself in his decline. We cried together one afternoon in the kitchen. That kind of crying that comes not from weakness, but from finally being allowed to feel. And Ellie, sweet Ellie, she became my right hand. She organized schedules, made signs, taught Carlos how to make proper cornbread. She was here every weekend, sometimes after school, always with that quiet determination that reminded me so much of her grandmother. She once said, "Grandpa, this place feels like her." And it did. One Friday evening, as the house buzzed with activity, people laughing over board games, kids coloring in the hallway, I stood in the kitchen, just watching. Daniel's voice used to fill this space. His little shoes by the door, his giggle echoing down the hallway. But now, it was other voices. New voices. And yet, it didn't feel like something lost. It felt like something rediscovered. I wasn't alone anymore. And still, a part of me hoped he'd show up. He didn't. But someone else did. Mid-November, just before Thanksgiving, I heard the front door open quietly. I was in the study, sorting through a box of old letters. I looked up and saw a shadow in the doorway. It was Ellie. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood Daniel. He looked different. Not older, more like a man who'd finally stopped pretending. Shoulders slumped, eyes tired, a hint of shame he couldn't quite hide. "Hi, Dad," he said. "Ellie wanted to stop by," she said quickly, and I thought maybe. He stepped forward, hands in his coat pockets. His eyes scanned the room, the photos on the wall, the new curtains, the small sign above the hallway, "Welcome to Marjorie's house." "I heard what you've been doing," he said. "She told me." I didn't realize it was like this. I nodded. "It's different now." He looked at me, and for a moment, the silence felt like it might collapse into something heavy. "I came to say," he hesitated. "I don't expect anything from you anymore. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not for the money. Not even the will. For forgetting who you were." I studied him. Part of me wanted to say something sharp. Something that would match the pain he'd caused. But another part, the better part, just nodded. "You've still got some of her in you," I said. "Maybe not much, but some." He blinked quickly and gave a tight nod. Then he left. No hugs. No dramatic reunion. Just a quiet visit. A brief crack in the wall he'd built. And that was enough. He was no longer part of my house. But he might still have a place in my heart, one day. As I watched Ellie chase after him down the steps, I realized something. Family isn't inherited. It's chosen, nurtured, and built, brick by brick. And if blood forgets you, kindness will remember. The first snowfall came early that year. Not much, just a dusting, but enough to quiet the streets, to lay a soft hush over the porch steps and the bare trees out front. I woke up that morning and let the silence soak into me. The kind that feels earned. Marjorie's house was warm and alive inside. Someone had left cinnamon scones on the kitchen counter, no note, just kindness. The kettle whistled gently on the stove. George was already in the workshop fixing a drawer hinge, humming an old war tune. I was on my way to the back hallway, adjusting the thermostat, when I heard the knock. It wasn't urgent. Just one, then another. Like someone unsure whether to go through with it. I opened the door, expecting a neighbor or maybe someone dropping off donations. It was Rachel. She stood there bundled in a thick coat, her face paler than I remembered, mascara barely holding beneath her eyes. Her hands were clenched around the straps of her purse. I didn't speak. "Leonard," she said quietly. "Can I come in for a minute?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, eyes moving across the living room like it was a museum exhibit she didn't quite understand. The new paintings. The photos of community dinners. The big framed portrait of Marjorie in her garden that Ellie had helped me hang just 2 weeks earlier. Rachel finally sat down on the edge of the armchair. She didn't touch anything. Just sat, hands folded, lips pressed tight. "I'm not here to beg," she said. "Or argue." "That's good," I said. She nodded. "I came because, well, because Daniel doesn't know how. And because I need to." I waited. She took a deep breath. We were wrong. There was no defense. No justification. Just those 3 words, raw and brittle. She looked up at me. "We thought we were being smart. Responsible. Thought you were slipping, and we needed to act before it was too late. But we weren't trying to help. We were trying to control. Out of fear. And selfishness." She paused. "I told myself you were old, Leonard. I told myself you didn't need all this space. That you were wasting it. That your time had passed. But I see now. I was wrong." I watched her closely. There were no tears. Just exhaustion. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This isn't money. It's a letter. From Daniel. He didn't have the courage to deliver it himself." She held it out. I didn't take it right away. "Did he write it? Or did you write it for him?" Her lip twitched. "He wrote it. I made him." I took the envelope and set it on the table without opening it. Rachel looked around again. "This place, it's beautiful now." "It always was," I said. She nodded. "I didn't see it then." There was another pause, then she stood. "I know you probably don't care about forgiveness. And maybe you shouldn't. But I wanted to tell you I'm sorry." I didn't respond right away. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel moved either. Just, centered. Grounded. I walked her to the door. Before she stepped out, she turned one last time. "Ellie's lucky," she said softly. "To still have you. She chose to." Rachel nodded, and with that, she left. I stood at the window and watched her car pull away, the snow crunching beneath her tires. Then I sat down in the kitchen and opened Daniel's letter. It was handwritten, shaky, uncertain, but real. He didn't beg. Didn't ask for anything. Just told me that he'd been thinking a lot. That he remembered the way I used to carry him to bed when he fell asleep in front of the TV. That he missed those mornings in the garage, holding the flashlight while I cursed under the hood. He ended it with, "I don't know how to be your son anymore. But I still remember how to be your boy. And I hope, someday, you'll let me try again." I sat with that for a while. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase what was done. But it didn't have to. Sometimes, an apology isn't about healing the past. It's about stopping the bleeding. I placed the letter in the same drawer where I kept Ellie's essays and Carlos's thank you note. Then I stepped out onto the porch, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The sun had broken through the clouds, lighting up the frost on the trees. I looked out at the house, our house, and I realized I hadn't just reclaimed it. I'd redefined it. This wasn't a house of grief anymore. It was a house of growth. And even though the visit from Rachel hadn't changed the will, hadn't rebuilt what was broken, it left something small behind. A door, not open. But maybe, just maybe, unlocked. Have you ever had to close the door on family for your own peace? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. On the first Sunday of December, we held a small gathering. We didn't call it a ceremony. That would have felt too stiff, too formal. It was just a Sunday supper, a potluck, really, but to me, it felt like something bigger. Like the final page of a long, complicated chapter was being signed, not with ink, but with warmth. The house was full. Not packed, not chaotic, full in the best way. Full of quiet laughter, shared plates, gentle footsteps across the floors Marjorie and I once polished by hand. Music played softly from Miriam's record player in the front room. Someone brought a pie that tasted just like the one Marjorie used to make, thick crust, cinnamon heavy, just the right kind of sweet. We didn't hang balloons or banners. Instead, Ellie had painted a wooden plaque, simple letters carved and painted gold, hung just above the entryway. Marjorie's house, EST 1975, reborn 2025. I stood beside it for a while, running my fingers across the grain. The year we first moved in. The year we brought Daniel home from the hospital. The year Marjorie planted the lilacs in the backyard. Now, 50 years later, this house had come alive again, not as a monument to what was lost, but as a home for what still mattered. George brought his wife, who I'd only met once in passing. She held my hand and said, "Thank you for giving him purpose again." I told her the same thing. Carlos came back, just for the evening. Clean-shaven, new job, shoulders back like a man finally breathing on his own. He brought a loaf of bread and a tiny potted plant. "It's not much," he said, "but I wanted to give something back." Susan made her famous potato casserole and offered to lead a new, Wednesday walks, group for widows and widowers. She even joked about turning the garage into a woodworking space. "Don't tempt me," I told her. And Ellie, sweet, steady Ellie, ran the whole show like she was born to it. Making sure everyone had a seat, a plate, a reason to stay just a little longer. At one point, I caught her standing at the kitchen window, looking out toward the garden. "You okay?" I asked. She turned, smiling. "I was just thinking. Grandma would have loved this." I nodded. "She does." That night, after everyone had gone and the house had returned to its soft nighttime creaks, I walked through each room, slowly, with care. The front room now held a lending library and a warm lamp in the corner. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee. The hallway echoed with quiet memories. I stopped in what used to be the sewing room. Now, it had 2 chairs, a rug, and a small fireplace, the kind of space made for reflection. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Marjorie, her eyes laughing even in stillness. I sat down and spoke to her. Not out loud, not fully. Just inside, the way you do when the presence of someone never really left. "We did it, Marge. It took me too long. I made mistakes. Big ones. But this house, your house, it's alive again." The wind tapped gently against the window. I thought I needed family to carry on our name. Turns out, I needed something better. I needed people to carry on our values. And they were. The ones who showed up, helped without asking, stayed late to sweep floors or hold hands or just sit in quiet company, they were the family I never saw coming. Chosen family. Real family. Later that night, I returned to my study. On the desk sat the last letter from Daniel, still in the drawer where I'd placed it weeks ago. I picked it up, unfolded it, and read it one more time. There were no new feelings, just a strange, soft ache. Like an old scar. Something healed, but still sensitive. I didn't change the will. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because peace, once found, is worth protecting. I placed the letter back, not in the drawer this time, but in a small memory box I'd started building. One that held Ellie's essays, a photo of George saluting in front of the house, and a flyer from the first community supper. These weren't just mementos. They were proof. Proof that even after betrayal, love could live again. Even after family failed you, community could rise up in its place. And even after loss, purpose could bloom. I went to bed that night with the sound of the wind in the lilacs and the faint creak of the hallway wood, not lonely this time, not sorrowful. Just honest. Just home. And as I closed my eyes, I pictured Marjorie standing at the stove again, humming softly, turning to smile at me like she used to. "You kept your promise," she'd say. And maybe, just maybe, I finally had.